in History with Charles A. Jennings.
Greetings. My name is Charles Jennings, and on this video, I would like to give you an account of what the ministry and the life of William Branham meant to my family. It's a difficult story to tell because there's so much to tell. Now, if you've ever heard of this man, William Marion Branham, his life is probably the most unusual life of anyone in the 20th century. And one of the most unusual ministries that has ever taken place, I would say, since the days of the writing of the New Testament. Now, during the healing revivals of the late 1940s through the 1950s, early 60s, there were a lot of evangelists, approximately 300 evangelists, tent evangelists, crisscrossing the country praying for the sick. And there were some very popular ones. But William Branham had a most unusual ministry among them all. And as the life story of this man goes, he was a Baptist preacher in Jeffersonville, Indiana. And somewhere he received the baptism of the Holy Ghost and came into the knowledge of the unity or the oneness of the Godhead. And I think it was in 1946 he received an angelic visitation. And this angel told him that he was going to have two signs. That when he prayed for people, that he would feel a sensation in his, I think it was his left hand. And the second sign was that he would know the hearts of the people. In other words, God would show him what was in a person's heart and mind. And we saw that demonstrated many, many times during his ministry. And the Lord told him that he was to take the message of divine healing to his generation, and nothing was going to stand in his way, even cancer. So, in approximately early 1948, he came to Miami, Florida, where we were living, my family was living, and I was only 3.5, 4 years old. And my dad was born in 1902, and he had a heart trouble that the doctor said was quite serious. So my dad was in his 40s, approximately 46 years old, with this serious heart trouble, a wife and 8 children. I was the youngest. And my mother's sister's husband, J.T. Crosby, from Charlotte, North Carolina, called up my dad and said, I understand William Branham is going to be in Miami, Florida. I want you to go there and let him pray for you. Well, we were going to the Church of God, that is headquarters, Cleveland, Tennessee, living in Miami. And the Church of God did not accept the ministry of William Branham. So my dad told JT, he said, we can't go, we cannot go. JT insisted on my dad, whose name was Clarence Jennings, you go to that meeting. So my dad said, well, okay, I'll go on a Sunday afternoon, for I won't have to miss church at my church in probably Coconut Grove, Church of God. So he went on a Sunday afternoon, and when Brother Branham called for a prayer line, a lady and a little boy came up before him, and Brother Branham said, "Ma'am, what is wrong with the little boy?" Because the little boy had a bandage around his head. And he said, "Wait a minute, don't tell me what's wrong with him, I'll tell you." And my dad thought, well, this is very interesting, because my dad knew the lady and knew the little boy and knew his condition. And Brother Branham said, "Ma'am, you're the grandmother. And I want to tell you what the doctor said concerning this little boy. He's got cancer of the head." And my dad said, "Well, he's right. Something is different about this man." So Brother Branham prayed for the little boy and said, "Go your way." And my dad said, "Well, I'm going to follow up on this case." And sure enough, the little boy was healed. That convinced him. So he went back to the revival. I think it was on Southwest 40th Street and Lejeune Road in Miami. And he was under a little tent, not a very big crowd. But at the end of the meeting, the last service of that revival, my dad said, "I'm going to get in the prayer line," because he had this heart condition. So Brother Branham did not take the time to pray for each individual person. He said, just walk up this side of the ramp and walk on that side. And Brother Branham shook my dad's hand and said, "God bless my brother." That's all he said. And 3 days later, my dad was driving his pickup truck, 36th Street and 22nd Avenue. And he crossed the intersection, and the Lord spoke to him and said, "You're healed. You're healed." And my dad lived to be 96 years and 11 months old. Well, while in Miami, that's when Brother Branham met F.F. Bosworth, he was an older gentleman at the time, but he became like a mentor, because Brother Branham at that time was only in his mid-30s. So to be honest with you, the Church of God leadership in our local church called my parents up on the carpet and dismissed them from the church. The whole family was kicked out. Well, just before my family was kicked out of the Church of God, we went to one of Brother Branham's meetings over in the St. Petersburg, Tampa area. This was around 1950. Now I remember going and taking the ferry across Tampa Bay and going in this big auditorium. And there was, even as a 6-year-old child, I'd been in church all my life, but I knew that there was something different about this meeting. When that man stood up and came to the microphone to give his sermon, which he didn't give a dynamic sermon, he just talked to the crowd, you could feel a special presence of God, unlike any other meeting that I have ever been in my life to this very point right now. Well, in that meeting, a woman came up before Brother Branham, and my father and mother knew this woman, Sister Johnson. She was the wife of a Church of God pastor. And he said, "Sister, you're not from this area, are you?" "No, I'm from Miami." And he says, "I want to tell you what's wrong with you. You have cancer." She said, "That's right." He said, "I want to tell you something that you may not know." My dad related this story to us many times. He said, "Your husband is sitting behind me on the platform, and he's a minister. And he has cancer of the throat. But God's going to heal both of you." And he did. Well, at the meeting of the excommunication around 1950 or 51, Brother Johnson was sitting there. But my dad said, "I am not going to denounce William Branham. I want to retain my healing." But Brother Johnson never spoke up in my dad's defense. But we'll leave that be. We'll just give that to God. Then we attended another meeting in 1953 in West Palm Beach, and Brother Branham was holding a meeting in a boxing arena on Military Highway. And I remember it well. 1953, I was about 9 years old, and we attended every service. We drove that 75 miles. My dad would take off early from work. We would drive up there 75 miles, and then drive back late every night. But the presence of God was so real and so sacred and so different. There was no loud music. There was an organ there. And somebody would lead a song. But the theme song was "Only Believe," written by Paul Rader back in 1930 or so. Only believe. And I'm telling you, people sat there in anticipation as to what was going to happen and what they were going to see happen. Because there was a special heavenly presence. I can't explain it. And I've felt the presence of God many times in different services and different types of presence when God would manifest Himself in different ways at different times, but nothing like this. It was like you were standing in the presence of Christ Himself. And there was a lady by the name of Sister Gavin that also went to the Church of God that our family knew very well. And she came up before Brother Branham in this 1953 West Palm Beach meeting, and she had her arm in a sling. Her arm had been broken. So I knew who Sister Gavin was, even as a 9-year-old boy. And Brother Branham, this is what he said. He said, "Sister, you're not from Palm Beach, are you?" "No." "You're from south of here, down by Miami." She said, "Yes, that's true." Then this is what he said. "Your name is so-and-so." Your name is, gave the first name, last name was Gavin. Your telephone number is so-and-so. And your address is 11 Lenape Drive, Miami Springs, Florida. How did he know all this? See, the angel said you're going to know the hearts and the minds of the people. And he said, I want to tell you how you broke your arm. He said, I see in a vision right now, you're washing clothes in an old wringer washer, and your arm went through the wringer somehow and broke it. Well, when I was 20 years old, 19 or 20 years old, a good 10 years later, I was visiting some friends, Brother and Sister Jesse Marsh, and they lived at 9 Lenape Drive, Miami Springs. They knew Sister Gavin, who was just next door. And Sister Marsh, when I was telling this story, she spoke up and she said, that is true. That's how Sister Gavin broke her arm. And I was in the house when she was washing clothes next door, and I heard her yell when she got her arm caught in the wringer. Sister Gavin was healed. How did this man know these things? It's like the biblical account. How can these things be done? How can you do these things except God be with you? Now, I've heard some people in their ignorance and really in their arrogance say that William Branham was a prophet of the devil. Well, I think they're walking on thin ice with God. But I'm going to leave that up between them and the Lord. But going back to F.F. Bosworth, my father knew F.F. Bosworth. And in fact, as a young boy, I went in F.F. Bosworth's house with my dad to do some electrical work. He was adding a back porch, and I could take you to his house today, Southwest 27th Avenue and 16th Street, about the second or third house from the corner. And Brother Branham had Brother Bosworth join his team, evangelistic team, and he would give sermons and lessons on divine healing, etc., in some of the morning services, and then Brother Branham would minister in the evening. And they went to Africa together, Durban, South Africa. And Sister Bosworth said that, telling my dad, Clarence Jennings, a lot of times when they came back from overseas, they would come back to Miami, where Brother and Sister Bosworth was living, and Brother Branham would stay there a day or two and rest up. And Brother Branham, according to the account of Sister Bosworth, Brother Branham said that he would have visions a lot during the night. And sometimes he didn't sleep well because he was having these visions of things that were yet to happen in his future meetings. And he had a vision of a little boy that was killed in an automobile accident, and he raised him from the dead. Well, that happened when they went to Scandinavia. And he had that vision. And Sister Bosworth said that he would come to the breakfast table and tell these visions of things that were yet to happen in future meetings. And every one of them were proven to be correct, because F.F. Bosworth knew him well and attended the meetings. And then Brother Bosworth died in 1958. Well, in around 1990, I was holding some meetings in the state of Michigan. So my dad went with me. He was still living. So the suggestion was made, well, why don't we go by Jeffersonville and just go in the church, Branham Tabernacle in Jeffersonville, and take the little map that they have available and go through the town and see the different spots. Well, the headquarters for the Voice of God ministry was still in that military quadrangle. It was a military depot at one time, and there was a building in the center. And the Voice of God headquarters was in that building. So we went there a couple of times and went to the tabernacle and saw the pictures on the wall and so forth. But one time we walked in the headquarters there in that old military quadrangle building, and there was an older man sitting there. And I didn't know who he was. And I started visiting with him, and he was very friendly. And he said, "My name is Brother Roberson." I thought, oh, Roberson. I heard that name mentioned by Brother Branham on some of his tapes, cassette tapes that I had previously listened to. And he said, "I want to tell you my story of meeting Brother Branham." He said, "I was a local boy here in Jeffersonville and a sinner, and I was drafted into the Army in World War II." And he said, I survived the war, had some close calls during the war, but I made it back home. And he said, I came home, and Brother Branham was in his ministry then, and he was holding meetings in the tabernacle, and somehow I met Brother Branham face to face. And Brother Branham asked him if he was a Christian. "No, not really," he said. So Brother Branham said this to Mr. Roberson, "I want to tell you something." He said, "I see a vision of you in World War II, and it's a real muddy road, and you're in a ditch, and this military transport truck slid off in the mud and rolled over you. But fortunately, you were in the part of the truck that rolled over you was the back end, so therefore no part of the truck actually hit you. And then I see a man standing, looking down at you. And Mr. Roberson, now Brother Roberson, said, "That's true, Brother Branham. That actually happened to me." So this would have been maybe 5, 6, 7 years later. And that man standing there, Brother Roberson said, told me, had his hands on his hips and looked down at him and said, "You'll be all right, son." Well, it was none other than General George Patton. That convinced Brother Roberson that this was a man of God. So Brother Roberson got a GI loan, and he was building a house, and he was proud of the house, and he was now a Christian, and he had a family, small family, and he drilled a well, and the water was bitter. Now, this is what Brother Roberson told me. The water was bitter. He could not drink the water. And he was extremely disappointed. So what did he do? He called Brother Branham. And Brother Branham told him, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been over the phone, said, Brother Roberson, don't worry about it. I'm going to speak the word, and the water is going to turn sweet. And he spoke the word, water, turn sweet. And the water turned sweet. And he said, we are still living in the same house, drinking from that same well. Now, there's a lot of mysteries about William Branham. I don't have to explain all the mysteries in his life. But I believe, just like the title of the book written by Gordon Lindsay, William Branham, a man sent from God. I believe it. Did he make mistakes as a human? Possibly. Did he believe some things that maybe I don't believe, maybe on prophecy or different things in the Bible? Possible. But that's neither here nor there. He was a man sent from God with the most unusual ministry. And there's a lot more about him that you can find out other sources. You can contact his ministry. You can look on YouTube, and there are probably dozens of videos on YouTube about this man. But my dad told me another story. Now, my dad, he was not a minister, he was an electrician, but he knew a lot of ministers and knew ministers that were on the platform and knew a lot of the stories that were related to him that these ministers saw firsthand. For example, in one meeting, a couple, this is after World War II, a couple came up to Brother Branham, and the wife needed to be healed of something. And he said, ma'am, I can't pray for you. He turned the mic aside. He said, I can't pray for your healing until you first get right with your husband. Because you were unfaithful to your husband while he was in the army overseas in Europe. Well, the husband got extremely angry. So Brother Branham said, sir, just calm down, because you were unfaithful to your wife. Well, don't you know that let the air out of his balloon? In the Houston meeting, a light appeared over his head. Some people tried to explain it by natural means, but it was a supernatural light. And my dad told me another story concerning the Pensacola meeting, that a crazy man being held by two strong men was brought up before Brother Branham. No doubt the man was demon-possessed. And Brother Branham said, turn him loose. They said, no way will we turn him loose. He'll kill you, Reverend. He said, turn him loose. No, we will not turn him loose. He said, well, I can't pray for him as long as he is being held by man. But he said, after church, we'll pray for him. So the way it turned out is that they took two cars. Brother Branham was in one car with his fellow ministers, and there was a car behind them where the crazy man was being held by two strong men. So they drove outside of the city limits of Pensacola, Florida. And it was at night. And Brother Branham had had a vision as to the layout of the land and everything that was in place. And he found that spot and he said, stop. Told the driver to stop. He said, everything is in place. Everything is here except one thing. There's a red car missing. In my vision, there was a red car parked right over there. And there's a car over there, but it's not red. They sat there till daybreak. And when the sun came up, that car had a red reflection on it. Brother Branham said, this is the time. So they got out, and he convinced these two guards to let this man loose. He said, I'm responsible for him now. And he just simply spoke the word, and the man was delivered of that demonic power. Delivered. Well, and that man later got a job with the state of Florida driving a mowing tractor to mowing the right-of-ways along the highways. There are numerous stories. They just go on and on. But let me mention this. About 6 years ago, now I had this television ministry, and people call in, of course, and a man called in, an older man called in. His name was Brother Roy. And he said, I picked up from what you were saying today that you know something about William Branham. I said, yes. Yes, I do. Not a whole lot, but something. Well, he said, let me tell you my story. This is what Brother Roy told me. He's living in southern Louisiana, close to the Texas line. He said, when I was 19 years old, I was an evangelist with the United Pentecostal Church. And I heard that William Branham was coming to an auditorium in Houston. I wanted to go. And he said, I was dating the superintendent's daughter. So I went to the superintendent and I told him, I know how the United Pentecostal Church feels about Brother Branham. They don't want us going, but I really want to go to his meeting. Well, the superintendent said, I want to go too, but I can't afford to go because of my position. Well, Brother Roy said, can I go though? Will you give me permission to go? Well, his future father-in-law said, yeah, go ahead. But he said, may I take your daughter? It's just right across the state line into Houston, Texas, and it's not far, and we'll leave early enough in the day, and then we'll come back after the meeting. Fine. So they went there, and they got there a little early, and he said they went to a restaurant, had something to eat. Then they stopped, and they were still early, and they sitting in the car, and he said, I love this girl that I was dating, superintendent's daughter. He said, we planned to get married, and he said, we were talking there, and he said, I kissed her. And he thought, boy, that's a no-no. That is a no-no. But I kissed her. So he kind of repented within himself. And he said, well, let's go to the meeting. Well, he said, being a minister, I wanted to sit on the platform. And he said, I came in the back door, I walked up the steps to the platform, and the platform was already full of preachers. Every seat was taken except one. And he said, I don't know whether to take that chair or not, But he said, I was standing there, and he said, I heard the door behind me open, and somebody walked up and put his hand on my shoulder. He said he put his hand on my shoulder and turned to me and said, Brother Roy, don't worry about it. I kissed my wife before we were married too. How? And he turned his head, and it was William Branham. How did William Branham know this? God spoke to him. You can criticize him. You can say anything you want to about this man. But this man was a prophet of God, a man of God. He knew the hearts of the people, and that sign was real. There's so many things to say that it would be redundant to continue. But I just wanted to give this testimony of the influence of this man and his ministry upon the life of our family. So, therefore, I have given my testimony as I have known it as a young man. And the last time I saw William Branham, I was an older teenager in the DuPont Hotel in Miami, Florida. He came to a Full Gospel Businessmen's meeting. That was probably somewhere around 1962 or 63. So that's my testimony, and I pray that you have been blessed. If you have, give us a thumbs up. I solicit your comments back to me. If you have some experiences, pro or con, I don't mind listening. And so it's all for the glory of God, not for the glory of a man. And I want to encourage you to subscribe to our channel, and I think you'll be blessed. So God bless you as you listen to this testimony and also other videos on this channel.
We thank you, and may God bless you for your response to this end time ministry. Truth in history, where the Word of God is not bound.